Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May God's peace and mercy and blessings be upon all of you. I want to welcome you all to another installment of our Pre-Iftar Quran discussion. Inshallah, I will be here for the next 3 days, covering the 13th, 14th, and 15th sections of the Quran. The way I plan on doing this is to first provide a quick summary of each chapter, then discussing a few themes and highlighting a few verses. The point is to give us a general idea of what is happening in each section, so that we can, inshallah, have a more meaningful and beneficial engagement with the Quran as we read it and listen to it in this blessed month and beyond. So I ask Allah to increase us in closeness to Him, to make this gathering purely for His sake, and to bring us benefit through it. So without any further delay, let's start with the 13th juz of the Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل واجعلنا من عبادك الصالحين. We seek refuge in Allah from the accursed Satan, and we begin in the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful, and by sending our prayers for blessings and peace upon the most noble of prophets and messengers, and upon his family and companions. We ask Allah to give us a sound understanding of the religion, and to teach us the proper interpretation of things, and to make us among his pious servants. Ameen. The 13th juz of the Quran contains part of Surah Yusuf, and the entirety of the chapters Al-Ra'd and Ibrahim. Juz 13 begins with the 53rd verse of Surah Yusuf, which is a little less than halfway through the chapter. So in the previous verses, we heard about the first part of the life of Prophet Yusuf ﷺ, how his jealous brothers threw him in the bottom of the well, how he was sold into slavery and then thrown into jail because he refused the advances of his master's wife, and which finally, how he succeeded in interpreting the king's dream, which in turn led to him being freed, and as a result, his master's wife confessed to falsely accusing him of a crime. So his name was cleared, and this juz begins with the king not only freeing him, but offering him a position in his administration. So Yusuf asked to be a guardian for the king's treasury. Later on, Yusuf's brothers actually come to this kingdom for trade. They don't recognize Yusuf, but he recognizes them, so he puts a plan into motion. First, he refuses to do business with them until they bring their other brother, who scholars say was Yusuf's full brother, while the rest were half-brothers. In any case, it's clear that this brother was, like Yusuf, beloved to his father and distant from his brothers. The brothers go back and ask their father to allow this last full brother to come with them to the kingdom, and the father is immediately suspicious, reminding them about what happened with Yusuf, but he allows them to take him. When they arrive, Yusuf privately reveals his identity to his full brother, and then continues with his plan. He plants a golden cup in this brother's bag, and accuses all the brothers of stealing, and then, when the cup is found, has them hand this brother over. The other brothers were distraught, remembering their promise to their father. They tell him the news, and he was at once saddened, but also suspicious, yet still hopeful that he might still be reunited with his beloved sons. So the brothers go back, and finally, Yusuf reveals his identity to them. They ask for his forgiveness, and he tells them, "La tathrib alaykum al-yawm." There will be no blame upon you on this day. He then gives the brothers his shirt, and tells them to give it to his father, and it restored his father's sight. Then the brothers sought forgiveness from their father, he said he will ask Allah for their forgiveness. Then the whole family went to Yusuf and prostrated before him out of respect, as this was the courtly custom of the time. And Yusuf then realized that this was the fulfillment of the dream he had at the beginning of this chapter. He then thanks Allah for his power and knowledge and asks to die as a Muslim. Finally, Allah closes this chapter by reminding the Prophet ﷺ of his mission and obligation, and the fact that the messengers before him also faced their share of difficulty, and that in their stories are guidance and mercy for the believers. So that was a quick rundown of what happens in this chapter. And while we cannot go into a deep discussion of all the major aspects of the story, we will highlight here a couple major themes. Perhaps the most important theme in this chapter is patience, sabr. This is exemplified throughout Yusuf's life, where he is constantly being betrayed by others and put into difficult situations. First, he was abandoned in a well, then sold into slavery, then thrown into jail for a long time. And despite all of this, he wasn't vengeful or bitter or angry, but rather ended the story by forgiving his brothers and thanking Allah. And similarly, we see the same patience in his father, who epitomizes this theme in his famous saying, Sabrun Jamil, patience is beautiful. He says this twice in the surah. First at the beginning when he learns of the loss of his son Yusuf, and at the end when he learns of the loss of his other son. And again, he says this while experiencing a tremendous grief, but also while trusting that Allah will give him a positive outcome. And in both cases, he says this after being suspicious of his sons, saying, Sawwalat lakum anfusukum amra. Your lower selves, your nafs, have seduced you into something. So he maintained this patience and optimism not out of ignorance, but rather with the knowledge that there was something suspicious going on. However, he didn't have any proof, so rather than being unjust and punishing them of crimes without evidence, he dealt with these trials patiently. And this brings up the second major theme of the story, which is the nafs, the lower self. As is mentioned right at the beginning of the juz, verse 53, Inna nafsa la'ammaratun bisu'. Surely the self incites one to wrongdoing. The lesson here is that one of the basic aspects of ourselves, our egos, is that it often calls us to do that which is wrong. So the shaitan might whisper or inspire these ideas, but the nafs, our very selves, will provide that internal drive to want to do evil. And this is also relevant for us during the month of Ramadan, when we are told that the shayateen are subdued. This means that a lot of the problems and bad actions we see in this month are not inspired by the whispers of shaitan, but rather from the desires of our lower selves. And a lot of the problems in the story begin with the temptations of the nafs. So Yusuf's brothers betray him not because they're evil or deranged, but because they were jealous of him, and gave into that jealousy. Similarly, the woman that tried to seduce Yusuf did so because she felt lust, and gave into that feeling. Then when he refused, she gave into her anger and frustration and had him unjustly thrown into jail. Yusuf himself faced the same temptations, but he subdued them by remembering God and being patient. He preferred being in jail to the punishment of disobeying his Lord. And finally, this chapter teaches us about forgiveness, and that's the note the story ends on, with Yusuf and his father forgiving everyone for what is past, while also reminding them of the importance of God's forgiveness, but with the assurance that God is Al-Ghafur Al-Rahim, the forgiving, the merciful. Now let's discuss the second chapter found in this juz, which is Surah Al-Ra'd, the thunder. This chapter is, as its name implies, about the magnificence of Allah's creation, while also being an extended admonition against those who disbelieve in God's signs. Throughout the chapter, Allah reminds us that everything in this world, from the mountains to the trees, to the alternating of night and day, all of this comes from God, and in these are signs for those who think. Yet despite all of these signs, the disbelievers still reject the Prophet, and argue with him, and ask for more miracles. And while this might frustrate or sadden the Prophet ﷺ, Allah reminds him that he is but a warner. Then the surah draws attention to God's knowledge and power, how he brings lightning and thunder, inspiring hope and fear, how everything prostrates to Allah, and that there is no one you can call upon for help except him. Then Allah tells us about ulul albab, those who have understanding. They fulfill God's covenant, they follow his commands, they're in awe of him, and they fear his punishment, and they will have paradise. Those who break God's covenant, on the other hand, we are told that they will have a curse and a terrible abode. And Allah continues in these descriptions of the disbelievers and the righteous, and of the hellfire and paradise, and ends with a stern warning to the disbelievers of what is to come. So unlike Surah Yusuf, This chapter does not tell any stories, but rather is very direct in its message and its imagery. In fact, as its name Al-Ra'd, the thunder, suggests, it is very powerful, mighty, and awe-inspiring. The real beauty of the chapter comes in its imagery and details, so I recommend reading through it slowly and carefully and thinking about all the signs of nature that Allah brings up. So the themes are, as I mentioned before, God's power and might, the beauty and benefit of His creation, and the characteristics and punishment of the disbelievers as well as the believers. And finally, I would like to quickly draw our attention to two memorable phrases from the surah. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to discuss them at length, but perhaps we can think about them later on. The first is, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Verily, God does not change the condition of a people until they change that which is in themselves. And the second verse, or part of a verse, is أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تُطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. Indeed, in the remembrance of God do hearts find rest. And finally, let's talk about the last chapter covered in this section of the Quran, which is Surah Ibrahim, named, of course, after the Prophet Ibrahim, or Abraham, alayhi salam, upon him peace. This chapter begins with a discussion on the nature of guidance, reminding us that God sent His revelation to guide us so that we do not prefer this world to the next, and that He sent previous prophets to spread the message bilisani qawmi, in the language of their people. So we're told of how Musa alayhi salam called his people to Allah, reminding them of His favors and warning them about the consequences of disobedience. Then Allah tells us about the people of Nuh alayhi salam and the tribes of Ad and Thamud, all of whom rejected their prophets and were destroyed as a result. So then Allah speaks about the traits of the disbelievers, the very types who drive out their prophets, how their actions are like ashes in the wind, how they will be betrayed by shaitan on the day of judgment, while the believers will enter paradise. Contrasting between good and evil, Allah brings forth the image of a good word being like a tree with firm roots, while an evil word is like an uprooted tree, unstable and unable to produce fruit. Then Allah reminds us, as in the previous chapter, about all the great things He has given us in nature, and how even beyond all these great blessings, He gives us that which we ask of Him. And perhaps as an example of what we should ask for, the surah then relates to us the prayer of Ibrahim alayhi salam, who asked Allah to keep his land safe, to protect his family from idolatry, to help them and provide for them, to keep him and his family steadfast in prayer, and to forgive all of them. Then Allah closes this chapter by reminding us of the coming day of judgment, and warns us of the punishment for those who do evil. So the one theme that I like to focus on with regards to this chapter is that of shukr, that of thankfulness, and how it is contrasted with that of kufr or disbelief. So part of the nature of disbelief is that it entails ignoring, rejecting, and being ungrateful for all the blessings that Allah gives us. We reject His messengers and their guidance, we ignore His gifts, we even forget that He answers our prayers. And there are two verses from this chapter that I'd like for us to think about in relation to this concept of shukr. The first is, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَظَلُومٌ كَفَّارٌ. If you were to try and count Allah's blessings, you would not be able to, but verily humanity is unjust and ungrateful. And we might ask, why is humanity unjust and ungrateful? It's not because we don't try to count Allah's innumerable blessings, but rather because we don't even take notice of them. The true believer is overwhelmed by God's goodness and is thankful for it, while the disbeliever couldn't care less about what God has provided, even though this very same person benefits from God's provision all the time. And the second verse I would like for us to ponder, لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَإِن كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ. If you are thankful, then we will punish you. And if you are thankful, then we will increase you. But if you are ungrateful, then verily my punishment is severe. So these are the two options before us. Now it makes sense that Allah would punish those who are ungrateful. But what's interesting is that He promises to increase the reward of those who merely thank Him. After all, There is not much we can do for the All-Powerful. There is no way we can benefit him, but just the simple act of acknowledging his blessings and thanking him for it is enough to merit a reward. So we will end on that point, and I encourage all of us to take some time today to ponder on the themes that came up in today's section. Are we patient? Are we grateful? Are we merciful? Do we really take the time to reflect upon Allah's creation and thank Him for it? We end by asking Allah for forgiveness if we have said anything wrong or made any mistakes. Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'una wanfa'una bima 'allamtana wa zidna min fadlika ikhlasan wa ilma. O Allah, we ask you to teach us that which benefits us and to benefit us from what you have taught us and to increase us in knowledge and sincerity. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. And we ask Allah to send His blessings and peace on the Prophet Muhammad, his family, and his companions. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And all praises due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.